Steven Ciobo is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasurer. He joined me from Sydney a short time ago. Steve Ciobo, welcome to Capitol Hill.
Pleasure.
I'm a little bit confused after Matthias Cormann's comments last night. Is there a budget emergency or isn't there?
No, I think the confusion, Lyndal, arises because some aspects of the media are talking about budget crisis in terms of whether or not the budget is going to get through the Parliament versus the Coalition's legitimate concern in relation to the debt trajectory that Australia is on. So let's be clear about these two things. We have got the vast bulk of our budget initiatives through the Parliament. The vast bulk have already gone through.
But you have not got what the Treasurer recently called the major policy issues that make the budget sustainable in the medium and long term. Some of those aren't even in the Parliament yet.
Well, Lyndal, the point is that the vast bulk of the government's budget initiatives have gone through, and we've already achieved around $15 billion worth of savings. Now, granted, we are still dealing with the crossbench and the Australian Labor Party in relation to some of the announced structural reforms that we'd like to make. And the point is this: there's not a ticking clock on those things because they're changes that are going to take place not for another 12 months and in some cases even longer. Now, it's not unusual, but it's not unusual for the government still to be putting through elements of its budget at this point in the cycle, and that's our key point, saying that we've got the bulk of it through, we're methodically working through the balance.
But you haven't got the indexation of fuel excise through. That was supposed to start 20 days ago.
Well, look, absolutely. There are elements that haven't gone through. There are elements where the Australian Labor Party, in the main, as well as the Greens and some of the crossbench, seem to be wedded to this belief that Australia can keep borrowing $1 billion a month just to pay the interest on the debt that Labor accumulated. Our argument is very straightforward. We think that it is not sustainable. We think it's unacceptable for Australia to run $30, $40, $50 billion budget deficits.
After the last unemployment figures came out, Joe Hockey, the Federal Treasurer, told the Australian newspaper, if you care about job creation and employment, then back the budget and back the budget now. Does the government have a different understanding of the word now to the rest of the population?
Well, Lyndal, we would love to know that our budget reforms would be going through. I mean, when the Coalition was in opposition, there were policy changes that the Labor Party implemented that we didn't necessarily agree with as a matter of policy, but we allowed to go through the Parliament with our support because we knew that it was unsustainable for Australia to keep spending the way that Australia was spending.
And there were other things like the private health insurance rebate that you blocked.
I wish I could say the same now. Well, hang on, Lyndal. We ended up letting the private health insurance go through, and that's exactly the policy that I was referring to. And we did it because we knew that it couldn't be afforded for it to continue the way that it was. So we have taken rational decisions, but the Labor Party continues to steadfastly block reforms that we're trying to put through. And Lyndal, it comes down to this. At some point, the Labor Party's got to start to walk the talk when it comes to sustainability, because the Labor Party and the Greens are all very big about talking about environmental sustainability and lecturing us about how inappropriate it is to say that we should have an impact on the environment today when it's tomorrow's children that need the environment. And yet for some bizarre reason, for some inconsistent reason, the Australian Labor Party is perfectly happy to destroy the financial environment of tomorrow's kids in order to keep spending money today because the Labor Party wants to be populist.
One measure that before the election the Coalition was adamant it was opposed to because of the impact on the mining sector was the mining tax. You could get that mining tax repeal through the Parliament next week if you split the bill. Why don't you do it?
Because, Lyndal, the problem that the government really faces is around the $17.2 billion of expenditure that's associated and tied to the mining tax.
But while the mining tax is in, companies still have to account for it, and those companies that are paying the tax still have to pay for it. You could deal with that bit of the problem next week and negotiate the other part, couldn't you?
But Lyndal, this is a false economy, and this is Labor's line to say, well, let's break the two up. The fact is this. There's $17 billion of expenditure that's tied to the mining tax. And Lyndal, let's not beat around the bush too. We were very upfront with the Australian people that, for example, the school kids bonus would be gone if the Coalition was elected.
Will your budget measures be through by the time of the next budget?
Well, Lyndal, you're asking me to predict what the Palmer United Party or what the Labor Party or what the Greens are going to do. Now, we remain firmly committed to working in a methodical way with rational actors, that is with the Labor Party, the Greens and the Palmer Party, as well as other crossbench senators, to try to bring about the structural reforms that Australia needs so that we don't have $667 billion worth of debt and we don't keep borrowing $1 billion a month just to pay the interest on the debt that Labor accumulated. But, you know, ultimately, the Labor Party, the Greens and the crossbench need to look the Australian people in the eye and say, you know, we're going to continue to mortgage the future of Australian children in order to pay for today's spending. And until such time as the Labor Party, the Greens and the crossbench are willing to concede that there does need to be reform, we're going to be facing some of these challenges.
Steve Ciobo, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure, Lyndal. Thank you.